Hello, you're listening to the final Niilampteyshow show of the season, and I'm joined by Neil.
Hello.
And Paul.
Oh, mate.
Let's start with moments of the season. Neil, do you want to go first?
Yes. Moment of the season. It's Wembley. I'm going to encapsulate it as one big thing, sort of Wembley, getting to Wembley, being at Wembley, winning at Wembley. It was such a sort of, just a really positive day, and kind of one that we were able to tweet and sort of treat as such, because it was in isolation. You could kind of forget everything else that was going on, and it just, I guess what was funny now I look at it, but it's like it's so entirely Cov like that. The one time we get to go and celebrate Cov in 30 years, it's the same year when we get relegated. It's in a like pretty much shambolic competition, and loads of our fans are kind of being driven away. That is just a strange irony about everything that went on. But even so, it was still a lovely, lovely day. One that I was able to really enjoy.
Yeah, I think you could add to that list of woes that came after it is as well, Leyton Orient took our most fucked club crown directly off us.
You're selfish.
Which I thought was very very unfair of them at this time. I can see moment of the season being very Wembley heavy. Did you think at all about kind of anything else that summed up the, any particularly epochal moment that summed up the poorer side?
Yeah.
Well, I think everyone's got their worst game of the season, which seems to be quite it was competition under Russell Slade. Every game people seem to. I mean, it's the moment of the season. I mean, obviously, moment of the season is Wembley. It has to be Wembley, and encapsulated by George Thomas's goal at Wembley. And then the other end of the spectrum is probably the first day in September when you realise we had to go through September, October, November with the side that Mowbray had in his head compared to the one that was actually on the pitch. And you knew from the 1st of September that it was going to be a long, hard slog to get us through to the next transfer window with the disastrous transfer window that we had had. I mean, it's quite interesting. Marcus Tudgey's done an interview today and basically just said, you could tell that we weren't really ready. We weren't ready for the start of the season. And when a player comes out and says that, and he's not slagging anyone off, he's basically saying what you're all saying of, he doesn't want to attack any of the younger players. They've got potential, but we didn't have the players ready for the start of the season. And you can't look back now and go, well, the transfer window was a success. It was a complete failure, and that's probably the crux of the season. Goes back to last August, really.
Such a stark comparison to the year before when we had that dream of a team when we started against. I can't remember the game. Was it Wigan or something? Now we started that game and played front of Maddison and Malamira. An absolute lunacy formation, but it was absolutely beautiful to watch. And compare that to this season when you look at the team, and it was just there was no life there at all.
Yeah, I mean, it was just bleak, wasn't it? Paul, do you want to take over at this point? What was your moment of the season?
Well, so it's got to be George Thomas's goal at Wembley, really. I mean, Neil encapsulated it correctly. The Checkro Trophy is a bit of a joke, and when you're playing in front of most games for less than 1,000 all the way through the tournament, it's a bit frustrating that we won it on a year that even the Football League were trying to destroy it, but still having 43,000 at Wembley shows there is a football club there if someone can harness it. It's just a shame that at the moment no one can.
I want to chuck in a few, because I think it's funny because it's obviously Wembley and that entire thing, but I want to break down a few different bits for me in what has been such a sort of monumental season. I think the terrible fear that I experienced at Cov train station when it just seemed so out of control, and thinking, God, this day has got the absolute potential to be a catastrophe. Like on the pitch, it could be a catastrophe, and that I thought there's a really good chance that people won't make it, and it could be delayed, and that, just everything seemed to be. It felt like there was something in the air when I got there, And then it was contrasted so starkly with when I got off the train and saw you, Paul, and everyone that we've sat with for so long. And I think these will be situations that resonates with everyone, because it seems like this is the nature of people's day. But we were in the fan zone and the sun was shining, and it was just really nice. Everyone was just so happy and really got into it.
I want to go back.
I know.
It's so good, isn't it?
Well, a mate of mine texted me yesterday and just said 1 month ago today. And I was like, it seems so long ago. But then George Thomas's goal was the point where it went from, it didn't feel very real to me until his goal. And his goal was amazing for the sort of aesthetic quality of it and what it meant. But it was the moment where I realised that we were 2-0 up at Wembley and it was 2 Coventry Academy products that had scored the goals. I was like, oh shit, I'm going to die if we don't win this game. Like, I'm just going to cry myself to death. And then we did it. But we did it in such a nice way. I think talking about it on that podcast that we did afterwards, I really, really enjoyed talking to you guys, and it was just so nice and joyous, and it's been such a long time that we've been able to be so happy on the podcast, and I think that was a real highlight. In terms of other bits, I'd say Reece Charles-Cook getting chased off the pitch by a dog at Oxford was really, really good fun at half-time. Not even so much chased off by a dog, but that he just saw a dog, got scared and just ran off and sort of jumped over the advertising hoardings. That was good fun. Marcus Tudguy's goal at Oldham, Paul. Just the strangest goal that could have ever existed, just out of nowhere in a game that we looked like we were just going to get hammered. He doesn't score a goal like that. That was good fun. And then the absolute worst was Fleetwood away for me, where that was the first point very early in the season where you just went, this is not right. Like, this is horribly, horribly wrong. And then, I guess Oxford away and the rest of the awful, awful games that we've witnessed. But it's not been a season without note, has it?
No, things have happened that we've not enjoyed.
Well, things have happened is probably a good succinct way of describing the season. Right, we're going to move on with end of season review. I think you'll understand and forgive us for not focusing on the Scunthorpe game, which kind of seems like a fitting footnote. But we're going to go best and worst signing, best and worst loan signing, best and worst team performance, best and worst player, and then some positive ones. Best goal of the season, best young player of the season, and most improved. So let's kick off with... Let's go with best signing and worst signing first. Paul, do you want to start?
Yeah. Depends what your class as best. I think most of our signings this season have been shit. And...
Here. Yeah.
Best signing's really difficult because there's been no one. I mean, it probably comes down to Jordan Turnbull, who was awful for the first 23 games of the season. After that, I mean, I don't think anyone's been a success out of the signings, and that's one of the reasons we got relegated. Is none of them lived up to expectations. Jerry Sterry wasn't that bad.
Well,
some of them didn't have bad games.
So we've got best loan, of course, as a separate section. I thought best loan was by far the hardest of these questions.
Well, and if it's best signing, then it probably is Turnbull, on the association that everyone else didn't actually improve the team, or didn't stand out, or didn't have enough good games to really warrant, the effort of signing them.
Neil, who did you go for?
I actually went for Gail Bigaramana, and he does count because it was on the 26th of something or other, June, July maybe. So it was a summer signing, and mainly because I still love him. And there was a point early in the season when I thought I was going to fall out of love with Biggie badly, but he's kind of done a Jordan Turnbull kind of thing where the final couple of months, at least he's shown he's cared, and there's been games where I love seeing it matter so much to him. And I think Paul caveated it well. It was kind of, we're going to have to base this one on portions of performances, not an entire season, because none of them have put in sort of performance-worthy, best signing sort of performances. They haven't. Nobody's lived up to it. But I think at the point Russell Slade fucked off, Big E came into his own again, and I feel like as a signing, he's worthwhile being in our team, and I'm just glad he's back almost.
I agree. I thought about Big E, and I went for Marvin Sordell largely as a kind of stamp your feet protest move, because I'm not even sure he overall performed better than Big E or even Jordan Turnbull in the latter stage of the season, given that he was here for a comparable length of, he was kind of here for one half season, of which Turnbull's had two. But there's part of me that thinks I wanted to throw him in there just because he was a really defining moment of this season. That, again, in previous seasons we've had better goal scorers that we've sold, but that this was like the only person that had looked like scoring any goals at all, and we still managed to sell him and replace him with a striker who I like, bear in mind, but that is noted for not scoring goals at all. Even in a Burton team that went up and he was up front on his own, still managed to not score any goals.
It wasn't Russell's strongest moment, was it?
No,
when he made that switch.
It's a poor decision, and it doesn't look like one. Matty Roper did that interview with him, didn't he, Sordell? I didn't get the impression that Sordell had particularly pushed for that move either.
I mean, the Bevan one's interesting, just because someone put on, I was discussing with someone on Twitter, and they called him a flop. And it's like, well, depends what you class as a flop. I think you've also got the caveat with people like Bevan is Slade just didn't know how to do with him. He didn't know how to play him. He didn't know how to get the best out of him. So you sort of almost judging Bevan badly because he clearly wasn't fit for a good portion of his career, and every time he tried to sprint, he broke down injured. Or he was playing under Russell Slade where he was just not being utilised in a way that was conclusive to getting decent performances out of Stuart Bevan. But in the fact that when we signed him, you were like, if we're going to swap someone for Sordell, we need someone to get us 10 goals, and he ended up with 3 league goals, then Bevan hasn't been a success.
No, I'd agree with that. On those terms, yeah. It was complicated.
Yeah, and it's a sort of the same as Sordell. It's like, it wasn't hit. The problem with Sordell, when I look back on him, is all I can remember now is him playing on the left wing and being out of position. And he just like, if we'd have had a manager who'd have played him up front with someone else, we might have got the better use of him. It's the same with Kyle Reid. Kyle Reid's signing hasn't worked, but that doesn't mean he hasn't had games where he's played well, or he hasn't done things which have been like the pass for George Thomas against Wickham and the cross for the goal at Wembley were brilliant. But you've got to sort of weigh that against the fact that he had about 15 games where he was utterly useless. And like Kyle Reid played about 30 times this season, and more often than not, he was poor.
Is he a worse signing?
Pardon?
Would you have him as your worst signing? Sorry to move it on, but I felt like...
Kyle Reid?
Yeah.
No, because
that's a well-populated pool, isn't it, I imagine?
Well, to some extent, for me, the worst signing, as much as I think Kevin Foley was a waste of a signing and just one of the most pointless players I've ever seen play for Cov, the worst signing was Nathan Clark, because it was the right position, it was the right type of player, and he made us worse. Or he didn't solve the issue.
I think you were right the first time round. I don't think you need to revise that. That is absolutely, in a nutshell, perfect. He was the exact sort of player that we needed, and somehow he was so awful that things got a lot worse. It's unbelievable, isn't it? Neil, who did you go for as worst signing, sorry?
I went for Yakubu, fairly sort of obviously, just for the sheer distraction of it all, and ultimately it turned out to be completely needless when we needed pure sort of concentration and drive to get out of that situation. We go and sign Yakubu with some sort of I don't know. It just didn't make any sense in the end, did it? I can't lie. When he came in, part of me looked at him and thought, oh, maybe he's still got it. You never know. But then it only took, that first game, and just to see that he wasn't fit, he could last 10 minutes, he could barely run, to realise that this was an absolute waste of everybody's time. And it was just another sideshow, which kind of gave people a reason to be shit. Because it was just like, oh, well, he's on the pitch and playing with Yakubu. It was just that whole period of like Slade's end of tenure. Those last couple of months just flew by, and it was just game after game of just losing. And he just that whole signing just sort of epitomised sort of the lack of care over losing almost.
But the reason I didn't go for Yakubu is the fact that it was a pointless. It was just a pointless signing. The thing with Nathan Clark was he actually played and was shit.
No, but he had good games, Paul. He did have good games. Now, that's why I couldn't go for him, because he had good games alongside Turnbull at points.
But he just cost us so many goals. And
I do agree.
So many bad games that it just far outweighed like one or two good games. And it was just, and the other thing with Nathan Clark, you would have thought he would have been the sort of player you would have kept to go into next season if he was any good. Going down to League Two, having an experienced centre half, even if you just kept him on and you were just going to use him as a sub, you would have thought, well, at least there's sort of legs with this. We'd keep him for another year just to sort of give us experience. And the fact that we've ditched him as soon as we could just puts the whole sort of fact that he was both shit, but obviously didn't have anything else about him.
For the sake of completeness, I flipped your version on its head, Paul. I thought Nathan Clark finished second for me in terms of worst signing, because I could understand why they signed a player of that type, and it's Kevin Foley for me that sits top. When you already had, the dual set of problems, that you've already got Dion Kelly-Evans, who I think we're all very enamoured with, aren't we? Not very, but there was it. But I think certainly would have liked to have seen him play more so than Foley. And you also let Aaron Phillips go. And I know these are the problems of different managers, but you let Aaron Phillips go, and you've already got Dion Kelly-Evans, and you sign Kevin Foley, and then you regularly play him at defensive midfield as well. Just, it was baffling to me. And I don't think he was as bad performance-wise as when I'd seen Nathan Clark, albeit that I'd seen him less than you two. I can't reconcile that thing of... And it happened with the retained list, whichever one you are looking at, of people's desperation to just keep signing players and keep getting rid of players. You just think, let's try and get... Especially with some of the kids... Just let them play for a bit longer rather than being like, no, ship them out, get rid of Ryan Haynes. You just think, what are we going to do? Just completely overhaul the squad every week. Any other honourable or dishonourable mentions for worst player of the season that we haven't touched on?
Worst signing
of the season. Sorry, of course, yeah.
I don't think you can make an argument for all of them. If you're rating all the signings out of 10, you can make an argument that 90% of them were 4 or lower. I mean, even everyone's favourite, or sort of people liked him a lot more than me, Callum Riley, he still wasn't a very good signing. Still isn't a very good player. It wasn't until he was taken out of the team and Ben Stephenson and Biggie got back in together that we started actually winning games.
Right, let's move on to the loans. Let's try and whip through these a bit more. Although saying that, looking at my list...
Riley was a loan, wasn't he?
Yeah,
he was.
But then looking at this list, is that there's some rogues on here. But let's have best loan. Neil, you start us off.
Best loan? Come back to me. I've not put that one down on my list.
Paul, who are you going to go for?
I'm going to go with Sterry because he was probably a 5 out of 10 and everyone else was a 4 out of 10 or lower.
See, I went for Chris McCann on a technicality.
The technicality being...
Well, he was a loan signing, wasn't he? Because he signed for Atlanta, Atlanta as opposed to Atalanta. And then we loaned him for that brief spell. And I think it's a technicality because of that, and the fact that he probably only really played 5 games in total, didn't he? But he looked... When he sort of played after the first couple, there were moments that you went, actually, you might be all right if we weren't so terrible.
And he was in that midfield three of Biggie, Stephenson, McCann, which we so famously predicted as being the best midfield in the league.
Yeah. That's another
yeah.
That's another
We're good at this.
Niilampteyshow prediction, yeah. Stick that up on the wall. For anyone criticising Kieran Crowley about the Gadjev thing or the Telegraph for their retained listing, let's remember that we are not in a position to be throwing stones in this particularly glass house that we live in.
Didn't those 3 win more often than they lost when they played together?
Yeah, but I think looking back on it now, that's probably a generous assertion that they're the best midfield 3 in all of League One. I still think
it was wildly positive, wasn't it? It was really overly sort of. It was one game we saw them in. Oh, this is brilliant! They could be the best.
Yeah. For me, it was that Port Vale away game where they just completely... Because we weren't meant to beat them, and we beat them so comprehensively, I was like, that's it, don't worry about the defence. Don't worry about the defence of the strikers, we've fixed the season. Apparently all it needed was Venus and 3 midfielders.
I'm just trying to find now, because I've got the fixture list in front of me, the game where... And the reason I couldn't give McCann loan signing because... he put in the least caring performance I've ever seen from a COF player.
Really? And that is a wildly contested one, I imagine, as well. Yeah,
but he basically just walked around in the air of a man who blatantly didn't give a fuck. I did mention it on the pod as being a benchmark of just walking around aimlessly.
I also wanted to, before I kick it over to you, Neil, so you've got time to mentally prepare, I also wanted to mention Farrand Rawson, who, whilst not good, figured higher in the rogues gallery of loan signings that we've had.
Yeah, in some games, certainly he put in some performances a lot in those final games when we were looking good. It's a horrible list, isn't it? I'm just looking over it, and I think I'm with Paul as far as sort of stability goes. Jerry Sterry
was all right, wasn't he? Yeah.
He was a competent right back, and I did quite like him. Other than that, you look through the list, and Riley, I had my opinion of him, but that soon dwindled when he went on a 5-game shit spell. So it was. I think Sterry's the main one for me.
Paul, once you found the game, jump in. But in the meantime, let's get to the real meat of this list and go for worst loan signing this season. This is a very, very long list, but I have found 2 players who I am very keen to mention. But Neil, you start us off, or Paul, you start us off, whoever was the desire to get in there.
I am ready. I have one, and it's for everything he represented, and it's Andre Wright.
Of course it's Andre Wright.
Mainly because I didn't see him too much. But when I did see him, he was at that point in the season where everything was bad. So you kind of give him that, okay, the whole team's bad, so maybe it's not your fault. But in the same way that Dan Agay just didn't put in any sort of effort, at least Agay had moments where he was scoring goals and looking good, and he got a fair few goals for us, didn't he? So I kind of absolve him of that because it's, got some goals, whereas Andre Wright was just a waste of my time as a Coventry City fan watching him play out on the left wing. It was just utterly inadequate.
Did he score once or twice?
He did.
And if it was once,
he got 3, I think.
What? Oh, Andre
Wright is 3. Because the only one that I can remember was the one that bounced in off him. That he had nothing. Effectively, he was just a post that the ball dropped off.
Oh, we got 2.
He got 2.
Did he definitely got 2?
Oh, Well, I don't care.
Yeah, still way up the list. Paul, I've got a feeling where I know you're going to go, but let's have it.
Go on then. No, I'm waiting.
Well, I imagine you'd say Lewis Page.
Well, it's got to be Lewis Page. I mean, the reason it's got to be Lewis Page and it's not Andre Wright is Andre Wright. We needed strikers. You sign a striker, it doesn't work out. Left back, we didn't need Lewis Page. Lewis Page didn't need to have played virtually any games at all, and yet he was our 7th highest appearance maker of the season, even though he was absolutely fucking garbage and far, far poorer than Ryan Haynes, who was keeping out the side. So the fact he was shit was annoying. The fact he was keeping Haynes out the side was doubly annoying, and the fact that his girlfriend is called Paige Louise is just trebly annoying. So, no, it's I mean, on the proper roast gallery, Lewis Page, it's amazing that Lewis Page doesn't feature higher in my worst player of the season list, but Lewis Page is one of the worst loan signings we've made as a football club for a long time.
So the two on my list and top is Andre Wright, but the Lewis Page, all I can think about with him, and I had to backtrack slightly from this, but hear me out, is I think, was it Bradford away, where it's one of the angriest I've been about an individual performance ever, where he basically spent the entire game out of position and then scolding other players for not tracking whatever decision he wanted to make. Like, he was constantly shouting at Kyle Reid for not somehow covering his it just didn't make any sense. His attitude was just horrendous. It might not have been Bradford away. I think Bradford away might have been the extension of it. I'm sure there was a home game where I was on the verge of sort of getting on the pitch to shake him out of whatever malaise that he was in. But for me, it has to be Andre Wright for the shushing at Oxford, as well as all of the terrible performances and everything. There was the moment where we were 3-0 down against Oxford after about 40 minutes. I think we went into half time at 3-0 down. And the Cov fans, who actually hadn't been that vociferous about their protestations, we weren't. There was a bit of booing, but it wasn't really hardcore. And that he came right. He was right down our side, and he shushed us. You were like, you live on a different planet. You are the embodiment of what's wrong with football at this very moment in time.
You're shushing us.
I'm shushing fans because all that must have been going through his head was this wouldn't happen when I'm back at West Brom and scoring goals in the Premier League, which will never ever ever happen. He was just like, yeah, when that happens, I'll be sweet. Yeah, all right. Let's see how your career goes then, Sunshine, because you are not up to it.
Also, for foreign loan players, I think we also have to. It's really difficult when you watch football because sometimes players put in performances that you think, this is someone I can actually get behind. And everyone who went to Bradford walked away thinking, Daniel Aggai is going to be one of our stars of the season. And how wrong were we? He was the difference in that game compared to every other game I saw him play was just remarkable. Because that first game you thought, bloody hell, this guy's got something about him. Lukaku-esque.
I was just about to say, let's flash back to shit Lamptey observations. I think me especially was like, no, seriously, if you watch the way that he played, you watch how Lukaku peels in off the right.
Yeah. But, and that is the major difference. I mean, you look at the players that we're going to talk about for Player of the Year, none of them, or Biggie is the only one who's sort of come in. And loan signings are so critical. As we saw last season when you Jacob Murphy, Adam Armstrong, players like that. We've always had one loan player who's stood out, otherwise going back to people like Stephen Warner. And to have no loan player who you've really got behind or you're going to follow the rest of their career is unusual. And it's just, I think it does say a lot about where the club's at in the fact that we made, 9 loan signings over the season. and not one of them would get in our best 11 of the season. I think it's quite worrying, really.
And yet Michael Felivi is now in Coventry City Folklore. So there we go. I will follow his career till death do us part.
He's our very own John Terry.
He is indeed.
Paul, you talking about last season's loan signings. I remember a period, what I imagine would have been October, November, where we spent a lot of time talking about the relative merits of Ryan Kent, and we were saying, he's not really scored enough, and that maybe he stretches the play, but like we want him to do more and everything. Ryan Kent would have been made mayor of Coventry if he'd have been in this season. It's just beyond belief, isn't it?
It's frightening. I mean, it's frightening, the situation. I know it's always difficult because obviously the rules changed and the emergency loan window went and things like that. But that's what's crippled the club for the last how many years is the transfer window, and we've gone through signings and loan signings, and we've both struggled. All three of us have struggled to name a best loan and a best transfer. And you look at the players we've had over the last 5 years. The majority of our better players that we've owned have come through our academy, and that's what we're going to talk about for the next 10, 20, 30, 40 minutes. Everything positive. And even Biggie, who you could put his Neil Gever's best signing, is only basically here because he came through our academy.
Yeah.
And I think we got, whatever you think of Coventry City Football Club and all the other bollocks that go with it, our academy deserve a lot of praise. And the people who run it, people who've been there in the past, like Gregor Rioch and people like that there's something right about our academy. And our under-18s have had another fantastic season. Hopefully some of them are going to be bedded in next season. So, hats off to the academy and the players. But if you can't supplement the gaps you're always going to have from the academy with decent signings, you're going to end up in trouble. And that's what we've done. But also, I think some of the players have got to look at themselves. Some of them haven't done themselves justice. People like Kyle Reid.
I think it's worth this name checking. So I hope to God I've remembered this right. But it's Rich Stevens, isn't it? Richard Stevens?
Yes.
Who's the academy manager. Because we talked a lot about Gregor Rioch, and with absolute deserved merit because of the job that he'd done there and everything. But it must be very difficult to take... If he is that sort of, excellent top-level figure... Coming in and doing that job afterwards, presumably, is quite difficult. There's part of you that thinks that it's easy because the groundwork has been laid. But we've seen, especially in football, it don't really work like that, does it? You need to be good to come in and keep that continuity going. And he's done a tremendous job, hasn't he?
Yeah.
It's always going to be that transition from being a good kid to a good professional footballer. And let's hope that we've done it with quite a few recently. Again, people like George Thomas and Lee Burge and Ryan Haynes who have really kicked on this season. It just shows it does take a little bit of time. We're not saying any of the 18-year-olds who've had great seasons this season are going to be the stars of the show next season. But let's hope they're bedded in. Next season's a massive season. We've really got to bounce back. But it'd be nice if we bounce back and had the opportunity of bedding some of these youngsters in. And we've discussed this ad infinitum. The thing that annoys me most about Kevin Foley isn't the fact he wasn't very good. It was the fact he was needless. He took games away from people like Dion Kelly-Evans. He cost Dion Kelly-Evans about 5 or 6 games. For me, Lewis Page cost Ryan Haynes 20 games. And towards the end of the season, when Ryan Haynes was playing week in, week out, his defensive play was improving because that's how it works. And it's just... That's where you've got to go. You've got to accept the fact that kids are going to go up and down. But if you're going to bring in a loan, for me, the loan player has to be standout. It has to be Armstrong or Murphy levels. Just signing someone else, kid, who is an average player is just a waste of time.
Quick question for you. Cyrus Christie, who, Cov Academy player, how many times do you think he played for us?
About 110, wasn't it?
Very good. 102. that's what if you. I think he. I don't think we. I think we all really liked Cyrus Christie because he was a Carve Academy product and a very good player. But I don't think we... Did anyone think that he looked loads better than someone like Ryan Haynes at the equivalent level of number of games played?
He's cooler.
He is cooler, yeah, that
he's
is
fashionable,
true.
Though, isn't he? He's got a cool... He's more suited. I know it's really superficial, but he's kind of in that way... He's more suited to a high league just because... That I don't know why that's a reason, but it is almost a reason where he kind of would fit in a team more. He's got that direct, cool right wing back kind of look about him.
But I think he also had to expand on Paul's point. I just think he had a huge benefit of having what ended up being 2 unbroken seasons as first choice right back, where it was you knew who your right back was. It was Cyrus Christie, and this I know I'm banging the same drums as I was earlier, but this constant rotation for the sake of rotation's sake of players who aren't really anything. When actually, and it's incredibly beneficial to have the benefit of hindsight, but the only paucity of good stuff from this season constantly comes back to our academy products, doesn't it? There's nothing else really that you can look upon positively. Like even Wembley, that's all our academy products, isn't it?
I mean, did you see that article I retweeted the other day about the Chelsea youth team?
Yes, I didn't see you retweeted it, but I read it, and that is it's astounding. And carry on, because I feel like you've got a point to make, but there's something I want to expand on with that as well.
Well, it's just... It happens quite a lot now where kids are basically moving 16, 17, 18, 19. And everyone's going, well, you can't begrudge them because, you'd move for all that money. And you're like, but most of them are moving for that money for basically 2 years. And most of them are sort of, that's depressingly the peak of their career. Quite a lot of those Chelsea lads, the peak of their career will be winning the Youth Cup with Chelsea. And they're just going to disappear from the ether. And you look at it and you read that article and it's really depressing because it's just like this kid was England captain at 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, and now he's not played a first team game in his entire career and he's 22. And where's he going to go? What's he going to do with himself? And I know it's always different, but you look at people like Dele Alli, Cyrus Christie, Madison to an extent, even though he's had a bit of a tricky one. But you look at some of these players who have, like even Harry Kane, he went out on loan an awful lot, but at least he was getting games. And you just look at these players who are Chelsea's youth team, and it's like these kids are probably brilliant, but they've never played a first team game. And it must be, how do you then sort of adapt into the normal world if you're released at the age of 21, 22 from Chelsea, and other clubs are looking at you going, well, I could sign you, but I've got these other lads who have now played 50, 100 games for us, and I know their league level. It's like, you look at Stephenson. Stephenson he's a League One player, if not slightly higher than that, but we've seen that from him playing 30 games for Cov, and it must be really, I always thought, I've got 2 girls, but I'd never allow anyone I knew who was playing football to sort of go to one of the big clubs because it's just so hard to break through at those big clubs. And they literally hoard players. And you wonder that the striker we had last season who went to Everton, who's nowhere near Everton's first team squad, who at some point this season probably would have got into the Cov first team. He might have played 20 games. He might not have done.
Is that not unfair to say he's nowhere near their first team squad? Because I track him reasonably well, and he is scoring a buttload of goals for their youth team, and he's only a baby. Wait,
but the thing is, it's like there was a lad I can't remember the lad's name. There's a lad at Sunderland, wasn't there, who was absolutely scoring shitloads at academy level.
Duncan Watmore?
No, it was. I don't. And he was.
Oh, it's a few. I know who you're thinking of. It's a few years ago, isn't it? He's called Ryan something.
Yeah, and he scored an absolute belt load.
Like a McSheffrey load of goals.
But he never got a chance at all. And you just like, I said, these kids at Chelsea are sort of the top end. These kids are, some of them they've paid a lot of money for already. And you're like, well, Everton are going to, Lukaku's probably going to go in the summer. They're probably going to go out and sign another multi-million-pound striker. And you just... the worry is that you just look at... We're losing that generation. That generation's not playing. And we talk about it a lot. There's a difference between being at academy level, and even Steven Gerrard's come out and said, well, academy level basically just players are just showing off. Because they're playing other 18, 19-year-olds. You see it with Daniel Agger. He's used to bullying people around. We saw it with Frank Nouble, who was clearly, when he was 17, 18, was a massive guy playing against 17, 18. As soon as he went up against adults, he struggled. You watch people like Dele Alli, who've been playing against adults since he was 16, and he knows what he's doing. But the problem is, it's like, he's had 2-3 years development. I think it's difficult when you're 20, 21 to get that 2 or 3, because then you're 24, and the next generation, it's sort of, you've got to be playing a lot of football, or you've got to be playing first team football in those crucial periods to learn how to adapt your game. And in England, we just don't have that generation coming through.
They do go out on loan though, don't they? The Chelsea ones.
Yeah, an awful lot.
Then they loan out like 60 players. I know your point is valid around hoarding players, true, but they do still go out though, don't they?
But also,
we're also way off piste with this. I would suggest on what is already going to be a very long pod. So if we were to move it on. And away from individual performances and onto team performances, I'd like to know your opinions on best and worst performances of the season, Paul.
Best, probably is Wembley, even though I have probably a bigger soft spot for the Wycombe game, just because we had been pretty shit going into that in the second half. They defended so well, and so many players who hadn't had particularly good seat. That was the first game where you could tell that Jordan Turnbull wasn't crap. He was magnificent that day. Ryan Haynes put in a great defensive display. Worst, it's just, there's so many to mention from very early on in the season where we were playing shit teams at home and failing to beat them with just insipid performances. Like even Shrewsbury at home, first time game of the season, which was just boring. Going through to, first half against Bury away, which was just depressingly sad. Oldham away, where for most of the game we weren't really up for it. Chesterfield away, which was the lowest quality of football I've ever seen from two sides in my entire life. And they're just, the ones that just roll off the tongue, aren't they? I mean, you two are going to have different lists because you went to different away games, or you remember different home games being slightly worse. I mean, basically anything under Russell Slade tended to be dreadful.
Neil, any best or worst that particularly stick out for you?
Amazingly, both mine come under Mark Robbins. So best was against Port Vale when Kyle Reid was having an absolute stormer. As far as for the first time all season, I felt like it was competent. So we were competent attacking team. We were running at them. They were all doing really well with the football, and I enjoyed that game a lot. And I enjoyed Kyle Reid's performance especially, and his goal. Worst performance, I think it's probably the Bradford game at home. I think we had a podcast after that. I mean, we had 2 games in a row, and they kind of merged into each other. But that was the point where when he came in, and we were all hyped up, maybe he might turn it around, and we were so impotent as a team watching that match. And I just thought, and that was the point, even though we all knew it was a struggle to get out of it, where I thought, hold on, we're gone now, aren't we? We're never getting out of this. Fortunately, he flipped it around a little bit, and we started to enjoy games a little bit more. But that Bradford game, I think it was, where I watched that match and we were just really, really, really bad at football, and I didn't like it one bit.
For me, I'm going for best. Wembley obviously is the one, but in terms of league games, Port Vale away was just such a joy. I know we touched on it earlier, but it was just really, really, really nice to watch. But worst, and again, I guess I've touched on both of them earlier as well. The sinking feeling that I got at Fleetwood away so early in the season was no good, and the 4-1 defeat at Oxford just felt so pointless and gutless. The main thing with that is it just felt like that was a team that had hammered us, that just were rubbish, like just really rubbish, and just walked all over us.
I mean,
and that I get a lot of teams like that. Go on, sorry.
The worst when Swindon beat us 3-1 at home, and you were like, we've been hammered at home by. I don't think Swindon won another game, did they? Towards the end of the season, they got relegated pretty much with a whimper. Yet they still hammered us at the Rico, and it's just all of our, apart from Port Vale, we did the double over because they were like us, a complete shower of shit. Some of those home performances, or games against Bury at home, Oldham home and away, teams against other strugglers, where we just showed nothing, we showed no impetus, no nothing, were just hard to endure. And no surprise that we've got through 4 managers, because each of them have overseen a pretty bad game or a horrific game. Or in Russell Slade's, just an entire, generally bad. That interview we came out where we was like, "Well, can't blame me. Look at the tools. I brought in Nathan Clark. No one can tell me Nathan Clark hasn't made the team better.
King of the tools."
Yeah, no one can tell me that Stuart Bevan hasn't made us better. You don't know how to use the guy. No one can tell me that Callum Riley hasn't made us better. He's made us run around a bit more. Like, you basically hired a fucking energetic dog. But you've managed to bring him in, but keep your best 2 midfielders out of the team. You fucking useless clown.
I think I'll name this episode end of season review or something like that. But then in brackets, you've basically hired an energetic dog. I think will probably be the suffix to it. On the subject of individual performances, what about best and worst players? Paul, do you want to lead in with yours?
Best players. I mean, George Thomas, who started the season getting a bit of abuse and has really risen to it, and I'm so glad he was top goal scorer. And I'm beginning, people are beginning to see what other, people like Kieran Crowley were talking about, where the guys obviously got it. I mean, said this earlier on one of the pods against. The only thing that came out of the Chesterfield game was you could clearly see that George Thomas was better than the majority of the players on the pitch, and I'm glad that he's showing that and he's building confidence. Alongside him, I think Biggie's had a up and down season. I mean, obviously no one's been brilliant all season because we're shit, but Biggie's proven what he can do. Ben Stephenson is a class above, and you watch people like Callum Riley come in, who's played in the Championship, playing alongside him, and the use of the ball, the reading of the game that Ben Stephenson has is just a step above people like Callum Riley. And you hope that if we don't hold on to him, he goes somewhere else and manages to get into the first team quite quickly, because there is a really good player there. Worst player, the list is endless. Kevin Foley, Lewis Page, even I mean, to go away from them who just annoy me. Also, Reece Charles Cook hasn't kicked on this season, and that's annoying me. Not that he's been dreadful, but his performance against Oldham away is up there with one of the worst performances I've seen for a long time. His general demeanour this season when he's played hasn't been what you would want out of a player who's trying to force his way back into the team. So I think Reece Charles Cook hasn't had a great season. Other players have been up and down, but I think looking back on this season, I think he started off first choice. I don't think Reece Charles Cook did himself any favours this season.
I want to come back to that, but Neil, I'll ask you yours.
Best, I'd actually go for Ryan Haynes. If I'm thinking consistent level of performance for the sort of duration of their games this season, and obviously he missed out a portion because of bloody Lewis Page, and we'll get back to bloody Lewis Page at some point, I'm sure. But as far as, because the thing is, I was looking at this and in my mind I've only got 3 players who I think have performed at a level for enough games where I think they could warrant it. So you've got George Thomas, Haynes, or Stephenson. But I think as far as just pure game by game consistency and to a level where I'm kind of excited to see him on the ball every single time he gets it, it goes to Ryan Haynes, I think. And worst player, and I think this is my interpretation, because he played so many games at such a poor level, it actually is Lewis Page. And I know you will be saying, well, why haven't you gone as worst loan? Well, actually, because he played so many games, it's an interpretation, you fool. So let me have this. Lewis Page, just for keeping Ryan Haynes out the side for absolutely no reason. You wouldn't mind it if he had shown sort of a boring level of consistency, but it wasn't even that. It was just nothing. He was a nothing player.
I'm completely with you on this in the sense that you can't give Younger Player of the Year and Player of the Year to the same person. I think it's churlish almost when there's been so many other candidates for worst loan of the season to give worst loan and worst player of the season to the same person, because you really want to spread that around to really emphasise
my thinking,
how bad everything has been. You need people to bestow these honours upon, and I think that Lewis Page is an absolutely worthy winner of just for everything, absolutely everything that takes him there. I want to give best player of the season to Ben Stephenson, which I think is probably indicative of the way that my match attendance went this season, in that I kind of got halfway through and sort of dropped off when he'd been dropped, which even saying it out loud now is just so crazy. If you think about his sort of genesis through this season, I always use that word and I think I always use it wrong, but I don't care, I've said it. There's been a lot of players like Chris Camwell, the most recent one, congratulations, obviously that's fantastic, and Carl Spence made his debut this season, I think early on, did he? Came off the bench?
He did, yeah.
There's been a number
made one sub appearance in the first home game of the season.
A number of young players, which is always a sort of, fabulous thing to see, end up making their debuts and come in. Ben Stephenson didn't play for us before this season, I don't think, did he? Or was it his first start was very early on in the season? But he wasn't someone that came into this season where we thought he's going to be a big player for us. And he very, very quickly went from being someone who was just a kid that played a game to being absolutely integral to... He immediately became like our best player, didn't he? Give or take.
Lightning light, yeah.
Yeah, and certainly the lightning rod for all transfer bids, apart from Jordan Willis, who has made it to quite a long way through this podcast without getting a mention in any of the sections.
Interesting.
Amazing. Sorry, I was looking when Stephenson made his debut. I mean, he did second game of the season, Portsmouth. Gadjev started 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Missed that one. 8, 9. Gadjev played 11 of the first 12 games of the season. If I said how many games you think Gadjev's played this season, you'd be like 6. He barely features in. Again, another player who barely features in any of our list. Under Tony Mowbray, Gadjev was first choice. I mean, he started. Biggie wasn't getting a look in at the start of the season. It was all about Gadjev playing alongside others, Rose, Stephenson or Mccann. And you're like, well,
bear in mind I haven't got to my worst player of the season yet.
Oh, sorry, Tom.
No, I'm only joking. The other person that I would give an honourable mention to for best player is Lee Burge, who I think, and this is, I wanted to come back onto the Reece Charles Cook thing briefly, because the two of them, it's difficult to not talk about them together. But I just think Lee Burge has moved himself into undisputed number one for me. And that there's this weird thing that happens where when you talk about Lee Burge, there's this weird thing that comes with it where people go, yeah, but his kicking's not very good.
Yeah.
And I kind of think, I mean, you're right, obviously, but But he's a 22-year-old keeper or 23-year-old keeper playing in League One. He's not...
The other one I don't like is when... Sorry to jump in, but is when people say, and that time he got sent off. That's not relevant.
Like quite a long time ago.
Yeah, he was like a young kid. He made a mistake. You can't basically tarnish his whole footballing ability with that for the rest of his career, can you? That's just not relevant at all.
I don't get the antipathy towards him, which still seems to be really strong. 70% of people said that they would have released him. I don't get it.
Once people hate players, they hate players. It's like Tudguy. That guy could have scored 10 goals in the last 10 games, and I think people would still hate him and probably still boo him.
But I'm not so pig-headed that there might be something that I'm missing, especially with the amount of games that I've missed towards the tail end of the season. But every time I've seen him, he just looks like a competent League One goalkeeper. I wouldn't say I've seen some people saying he's the best League One goalkeeper or whatever, and that's too far. But he's a good League One goalkeeper. I don't get it.
But I think people like having broad brushes to beat people with. It's like you almost can't praise Lee Burge without someone saying, yeah, but he can't kick. In the same way you can't praise Ryan Haynes without someone going, yeah, but he can't defend. And it's he can defend. He's not Maldini, but the guy can defend. And some of the games he's had towards the end of the season, he had good defensive games. Against Wickham, he was brilliant defensively. So you're like, well, but again, he's like 2021. This might come really strange, he might improve. And the other thing is, he might not be that, we're not going to get a better attacking left back than him in League Two. And there's no argument we're going to get a better defensive one either. So, and I mean, it's interesting because the other player we haven't really talked about is Jody Jones. Another player who everyone's got, whatever you say about Jody Jones, the automatic broad brush with him is, well, he ain't got a right foot. And it's like, well, but when we played him on the left wing towards the end of the season, where he didn't continually cut back, he looked better. He put in some great left-footed crosses because he found space, and because he was already on his left foot, he put in the cross. So that criticism decreased because he didn't need to keep cutting back. But I never heard anyone go, oh, Carl Reed's got no right foot. Well, Carl Reed didn't play on the right wing at any point where he had the same situation that Jody Jones had. It's some people, their weakness, and every player in our team has a weakness, is what's used to beat them with. I mean, again, it's interesting. Jordan Willis, who I think some people had or would have as Player of the Year, we didn't have anywhere near the top of our Player of the Year because he's another player who's played a lot this season who I don't really think has developed, and I'm still not sure if he's best at right back or centre half. Another player who's just, I'm not sure what's happening with Jordan Willis. Maybe it'd be better if he just left and went somewhere else. Someone would just go, no, you're just a right back. I'm not even going to dick around with the centre half malarkey. Or he'll go somewhere else and turn into a really good centre half. It's just another player who he has had the opportunity this season to stand out. And while we talk about Jordan Turnbull having a roller coaster of a season where it started off very low and he's come in at the end of the season, you're like, okay, I get it now. I understand why people rated you so highly. That revelation's never happened with Jordan Willis. I still watch him and go, you're a pretty bang average League One centre half.
The thing with Jordan Willis, so I'm going to play devil's advocate to an extent. I think, and I'm also going to use a Paulism here, I think this season has been punctuated by injuries again for him to an extent, hasn't it? And if you could get him fit for the amount of time that it would allow, I think it needs for someone to come in, Robbins, to say to him, you're going to play 20 games in a row at centre-back or right-back, and then after that, it's made one way or the other. You either establish yourself, because I think Jordan Turnbull is a good example of it. I don't think it's as easy as saying, he's crap, I think we talked about it quite a lot during the season. We said his performances have been awful, but we can't help but feel like there might be something in there. And I feel that very acutely with Jordan Willis. I think he is the sort of player that I think is amazing for League One of the Championship, because I'm very convinced that the level of player that you've got in there is prone to making mistakes, because that's one of the things that identifies you as being a higher level player. But the good thing about Jordan Willis is that his athleticism and physicality means that he often manages to make up for it. And I think we've all recognised that at different points, but that I just need to see him play for a period than he ever has in one position to work out where he really sits, because it must be very difficult be moved around and having your performances or appearances punctuated by injury.
It's fair, but I mean, sorry, just
before you make a point, I missed a lot of that, and just can you make a note in case it didn't come through? I'm sure it did. I'm sure you both heard it, but I missed about 15 seconds worth.
Oh wow, okay, that's a tremendous amount. By the way, luckily, I'm not going to post this tonight, but I'm working from home tomorrow, and I'm very quiet at work at the moment, which means I'll largely just be sat editing this. So it's fine.
Sorry, yeah, my riposte with the Jordan Willis, I mean, he did start 36 league games, and he did play probably 30 of them at centre-half. And I know he wasn't helped by the fact that he probably does need a more senior centre-half alongside him, and whether or not he was burdened with the captain. And towards the end of the season, obviously, we had that fast where he was clearly bloody injured, and yet we still sort of got him to hobble onto the pitch. But there are parts of his game which I would like to see develop that I haven't yet seen develop. And I know just
like being able to pass a ball, or
well, just cutting out that punt from right back to the left wing would be just a nice start. Just, you know, being a bit more considered when he's in possession of the ball would be nice. But Jordan Willis is just an interesting one. He has to start progressing at some point. But there's also that part of you which is like, well, we are a League Two side. We keep talking about the churning of players. He is a player who is relatively consistent. He's not truly awful. So he's normally a 6 out of 10 kind of guy. Maybe he is the sort of player that you just sort of accept he's going to make mistakes in games, but we can build around him, and he isn't the first player you'd want dropped. He is a player you could develop a squad around. He's useful to have. So,
yeah, I mean, I think his future will be dictated by his own choices. I think there were championship teams trying to buy him in January, weren't there? And
there was one. They're the same team who are interested in him now. Were the other basket case in league football of Rotherham.
I thought it was Preston that was trying to buy him. Was it Rotherham?
Yeah, it was Rotherham.
Oh, that makes a lot more sense.
Yeah.
But he would be nowhere near my get rid of list. He's absolutely someone that I think that I would like to see more of, especially at League Two level. Oh God, that's the first one.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because obviously Jordan Turnbull had a relegation clause, and so did Stuart Bevan. Which was quite interesting when we signed Stuart Bevan. Obviously, he asked for that, knowing that the situation was relatively dire. But I can't imagine, considering he came to us in the situation we were in when we signed him, I can't imagine anyone's looked at the Stuart Bevan performances in the latter half of the season and gone, yeah, he's a guy I want to bring. You know, he's 32, 33? Or is he 34?
You say... I think he's 32, 33, but you say that, but we've also criminally misused him. What's interesting is to know who wants a striker that doesn't score goals, but there is a place for someone like that, isn't there?
I just think that surely there might be better options. Other clubs would be looking at younger, better options now. I'd like to see, and that sounds really harsh, I'd actually quite like Bevan to stay, but he has to play alongside better or someone who's going to score. I mean,
I think he plays next to Kwame Thomas. Yeah.
Kwame Thomas is another player we haven't discussed, and the other one who's being released is Ruben Damaris, who towards the end of the season, when we were winning games again, was having a key impact. Is he the sort of player who you would like to have seen keep, or do we just accept the fact that his lack of physicality would be would be the negative that completely outweighs any positives he had in League Two.
Neil, are you a Damaris guy?
Yeah, I like him. I don't have a great issue with him letting him go, just purely, and it's not around size or anything. It's just because Mark Robins is being tasked now with creating a squad that he wants to get out of the league, and it means some tricky decisions. And one of those will be, although Damaris has come in and shown some great quality, I think, in the last few games, ultimately he's trying to build his own team here, and some players are going to have to go in order for more people to come in. So I'm trying to be really pragmatic about it and not get too sort of emotionally attached to people like Damaris, who I still think of in last season's terms, which was a really, really lovely to watch player alongside Maddison and that lot. And I think he's got that ability, but yeah, I don't think there's any complaints from him. He can't really that he's going, because I mean it's not like he's torn up any trees, has he really?
But it does come back to the problem we had this time last season, where you look through the squad and Burge is out of contract, Stokes out of contract, Turnbull's available, Biggie's out of contract, Rose has been released, Clark's been released, Lemaire's been released, Burnham's come back to his home club, still got Jones, Reed's been told he can go, Riley's gone back, Gadjeffer's gone. So Kwame Thomas is definitely here. So what's that? 3 players were definitely here. Stuart Bevan's can go. Foley's gone. Rawson's gone. Tugguy's gone. Foley's gone. Richard's got signed on. Haynes offered a contract. Finch has gone. George Thomas is here. Kieran Harris is here. Dion Kelly-Evans has been offered a contract. Ben Stephenson's still here, and Maycock. Like, we're talking again of bringing in 20 players. And with a relatively small budget, is just a massive ask. It's like, if you keep Damaris, that's another player you don't have to bring in, someone you sort of know has got a bit of quality.
But that's really tentative, isn't it? As someone you sort of know has got. It's not. If he wants to build his team, he needs to build it, doesn't he? And I'm with you. I don't think we should constantly keep changing the team. But let's face it, we've just gone down second bottom from League One. It's not a good squad. It's not a good team. So if it means foregoing one player, and ultimately when I look at that list, I don't see too many that I'm completely displeased with. There's always going to be differences of opinions about one or two. If I saw that list and there was like 10 players in there and I wanted to keep them all, or it was all the good ones, I'd be angry. But the couple of players here or there which I could toss a coin on, I don't really mind.
And that's fair. I just think it's just 20. We're basically rebuilding the squad again, aren't we? We're not building a team. We're basically rebuilding the squad, and it just makes it extremely difficult. I mean, if I was Ryan Haynes, I think I'd leave. I've got to be honest. Dion Kelly-Evans is probably. I don't think anyone's. I think Dion Kelly-Evans would probably stay. But if I was Ryan Haynes, I think I'd trust myself to get another League One club at least.
Well, I've seen the list, and I gather he is leaving, so that's that sorted. Let's move it on anyway. Let's fly through these very, very quickly. I want one answer for each of them. Best goal,
yes.
Neil.
Ben Stephenson, MK Dons.
That's a beauty. Paul?
Thomas at Wembley.
It's very hard to look past that, isn't it? But I'm just for the sake of having a third option. Obviously, I'd go for George Thomas. I would go for Tudguys against Oldham just because it was so odd.
If you want to see the good quality goals, just very quickly, there was a checker trade game early in the season when we scored 3 at home. All 3 goals were insane. Aguiar scored, Jody Jones and Lemire scored that dink. Go back on YouTube and let's have a look at those goals. They're incredible. I
think I know the game that you're talking about, but I still would rather go back to December 2012's Goal of the Month competition. That
different level.
We'll post the link to that.
Yeah,
because that's the McGoldrick era. That's the anyway. We digress. Best young player.
Me?
Yeah, Neil, hit me. Yeah.
Ben Stephenson. He's a proper kid. And it's his first season. So consistent. Played loads of games. And just sheer ability and performance level. Yeah, great.
Paul?
Dion Kelly-Evans.
Yeah, I've got a list in front of me. Sorry, go on. Hit me. Yeah, sorry, go on.
The only reason it's just because we were talking about Aaron Phillips going last season, and one of the caveats to Aaron Phillips going was at least that means that Dion Kelly-Evans will get games, and I still look at it and just think if he'd have played 30, 40 games this season, it would have been one of the big pluses of this season, was just seeing his development. And again, it's just a wasted thing that he played so infrequently. But when he played, he showed that he has got the quality.
At least he's still very young. Yeah, he's still really young. So there's a season at this age it'll kick on surely. He's been my surprise this season. I think wasn't expecting much, just purely because of sizeism. But he's played well in every single game.
That was what I was going to say. Actually, is that it's one of the rampant ills of society.
Yep,
is heightism. Is that, Paul, Neil, you agree? I'm sure it's as bad as any of the other isms, and I think he's suffering with it really badly. I love Dion Kelly-Evans. It's Ben Stephenson for me, but I had two names on that list, and it was Ben Stephenson and Dion Kelly-Evans, who have come through this season in a season that has been like a war for most players. Those two have come out with pretty clean reputations, haven't they? They're the two that have come out where their standing in the squad from the start of the season to the end of the season has gone up, and I can't think that's been the same for many players. And finally, most improved, which I feel like is a bit more of a talking point, but we'll try and keep it brief again. Neil, do you want to get started?
Hands down for me, it has to be George Thomas. As far as improvement goes, if we're looking at that word specifically, from the point of early in the season where I don't think he played very well in those opening.
No, you're absolutely right. Yeah,
and he has improved, and now like you say, he's another one who's now is standing in the squad is unchallenged. You can't look at George Thomas and not think he's an integral part of that squad. Whereas earlier in the season, there were questions and there were people who did criticise him, and me included. But my criticism was around the fact that I wanted him to believe he was good enough, because people kept telling us that he was this great young player, and then he was like this sort of broken shell of a man on the pitch who just didn't want to do anything with the football. And now we see everything that people were talking about. He's a really, really good player.
Your criticism of Thomas does not file under massive loads of mistakes we've made this season category. I think actually you were critical, but massively right, because what you talked about was, I'd like to see him feel like he's the player that people have described him to be, and I would suggest, but given no actual knowledge whatsoever, that it's the mentality that has changed in him rather than any of the ability. He just looks like a player who's more confident now, and that he's playing to a level that we've been told that he can achieve. So I think you're absolved.
I hope so, because I always wanted him to do well, and I never said he was a bad player, and that's hiding behind something. But I knew there was something there, but he just wasn't showing it. And then it just came to a point where, when you're a young player, you have to start showing it eventually, and thankfully he has. Yeah,
and you've just mentioned it there, but I want to reiterate that point. I know that we've been critical of players this season, but we have just been relegated to League 2. We want the best for all players, and also we disassociate people and player when we're talking about these. All of these people, Lewis Page might be a tremendous chap. Side note, I bet he's not. But I'm not bothered about the people involved. We're talking objectively as fans of a club, and I hope people don't get that conflated with saying these people are awful, except in Lewis Page's case, where I think he probably is. This is literally just objectively being football fans and thinking this is what's happened to our club. Paul, your most improved player of the season, please.
I've got three. I've got Burge, Haynes and Thomas, because none of them started the season in first choice in their position. All three of them have developed through the season, got better, basically proven why they deserved a bit of time and a bit of patience, and all three of them come out of it at the end having shown that they're good players. And if we weren't relegated and they were all going to stay, they would be three of the first names on your team sheet next season. And the fact that two of them probably won't stay, and there's question marks over George Thomas, and they're some of the players who are likely to stay in League One. If not, we heard that Ryan Haynes was looked at by Wolves, might go to a high level. I think shows everything for what they've done this season. So there are some players who are reasons we got relegated, and there are some who just happen to be in the team that got relegated, and I put those three in the latter. I think I wouldn't point finger at any of those three as a reason why we got relegated.
Yeah, and I'd like to kind of, before moving on to mine, very quickly saying there are times when a player doesn't look good because of the circumstances in which he finds himself. And I think of Cov players, no one has typified that better than John Fleck, who was nominated for the Player of the Year. He was in the final three for Player of the Year. And that we've talked ad infinitum over the last few years, given that this podcast has largely been in existence whilst he's been a Cov player, about when he's good, he's very, very good, and when he's bad, he's horrid. And that when we look good as a team, it's because he's running things, and when things are difficult, he struggles. But in a Sheffield United team that has scored 100 points, that's got 100 points, he is like the guy. And I think that there's a lot to be said. Sorry, go on, Neil.
No, just a side note. I loved him all those years. Never had a bad word to say about John.
But you would surely admit that he had peaks and troughs, and that his best periods coincided when we were good. And
not as stark as I think other people. I as far as the troughs go,
okay.
Honestly, I didn't think he was, even those games where people were struggling with him. I know he had bad games, but I think, I'd say in my mind 80-90% of his games he looked like a good player. But I think we had those arguments all over the years, didn't we? Yeah,
of course. But that I guess I think very differently. I think that when we were, and I think it doesn't mean he's a bad player. It means that in the same way that we were talking about Stuart Bevan, he's the type of player that thrives in a team that is doing okay. And whatever that means about his either performance, mentality, I've got no idea, but it just seems to be a fact to me, albeit one that is, up for debate. But I think that when we're talking about the academy kids, I think there is sort of a worry about throwing the baby out with the bathwater and saying because we got relegated this season, it means that the entire squad is absolutely shite. And I'm not sure that's entirely true. I think some of the academy kids are still absolutely, Ben Stephenson and whoever else who we've talked about, absolutely worth persevering with and keep going with.
Sorry, while you're on that point, it's like the people who are going, well, if we'd have appointed Mark Robbins earlier, we would have stayed up. But all the squad is shit, and it's like, well,
can't both be true, yeah.
Yeah, it's like that. So obviously that's an anathema. You can't say every player is shit, but if Mark Robbins had come in, we would have definitely stayed up, because would he have had a different team? Well, no. So at the end of the day, not all I'd say the problem is we've had a lot of bad players. We've also had a couple of managers who didn't quite get what was going on. Sideway Sammy's written his post-season review, which is just an epic, brilliant piece of literature. And the bit he's written about Tony Mowbray, it's like in 18 months he never really got to grips with League One. And I think the start of this season was demonstration that he just couldn't quite get his head around what he was trying to achieve. So when you've got that context, that we started, we didn't win any of the first 10, 11 games.
No,
you just well, it's not always the player's fault. You look at Stuart Bevan. He's not a bad player. We just had a manager who just didn't know what the hell he was doing with him. Same could be said of Carl Reid. He's not a left winger in a 4-3-3, and we knew that. We knew that before. We knew that when we signed him. If you'd have asked any of us, we'd have gone, Carl Reid isn't that guy. He's a left midfielder in a 4-4-2. Yet we wasted 10 games this season playing him completely out of position and him being shit. I don't blame Carl Reid for that. I blame Tony Mowbray for not doing his research, not actually understanding what he was signing. So, as you say, not all the players are awful, and whether or not, to some extent, who you apportion the relegation down to, whether or not it's the owners, the management, or the players, I think there's probably blame go each way. But some of the players have had either good periods, like Turnbull who's had a good 10 games, or other players who have been adequate all season, but they would have been adequate if we'd have finished 10th. I don't think Jordan Willis would have been a brilliant player if we'd have finished 10th, but he probably would have had a very similar season because that's the sort of guy he is.
So I'm going to pick up on that and finish off with my most improved player, which is, I'm surprised he hasn't come up before, is Jordan Turnbull. So his performances from the start of the season to the end of the season are almost unrecognisable, I would suggest.
Yeah, good call.
Let's get through the last little bit of what we've got. So we have got on our itinerary, we have got a manager roundup, should we have gone down, and a little bit of a Wembley sort of reminiscence. So I think we can very quickly whip through, and I would suggest you've got 3 words in which to describe all of the managers that we've had this season. We'll go through them one by one. We'll very briefly talk about should we have gone down or not, because Paul, certainly I think for you, you've talked about it sort of in hypothetical terms as we've gone through. And then Wembley we've already done, but I think we should finish there, because as vile as this season has been, there's nothing can really top that day. For me still, winning that day and the day and everything else just completely, this might be a very controversial thing to say, it trumps everything else that's happened this season. Long term, it won't, but short term, when I think about it, I think it's been so long that we've been since having a day like that. Managers-wise, we talked about Mowbray a second ago. I saw a thing recently that was managerial win ratios of all managers in the Football League this season who have taken charge of more than 10 games or more, and we had both of the bottom 2. Mowbray was bottom with 0%, which I would suggest is damning in terms of reputation. And second was Slade, of course. I think he had maybe 7%, which as well, just in case, for those of you that aren't huge football fans, not good. Mowbray, a few words on Mowbray, a very few words. Paul, then Neil.
Disastrous transfer window. Disastrous start to the season. Amazed he managed to get a job in a high division after the way he basically lost the plot at Cov. And this is me probably being a bit snide and nasty. I'd chuckle if he took Blackburn down.
Yeah. Neil?
He messed everything up, Joey. Yeah, from last season to this. I was prepared to go up this year. This was the year after everything last year, time to build on the team, and he got it so wrong. And he will get jobs for life, Paul, I think, just because he did well in his first job ever. And we know that's the rule with managers.
The thing with, if anyone was sort of,
this sounds like it's going to be a long point.
No, it's quite a short one, actually. It's like, someone sat me down, it's like, Tony Mowbray, just give me, like, the critical points. I would just play them. The interview he did after the Oldham game at home, when he came out and went, this team, well, obviously not this team, because it was a completely different team, but this team beat Oldham at the end of last season, and now they can't beat Oldham. And you were like, you fucking idiot. Like, just having a go at, you weren't here last season. Why aren't you as good as the player I had last? And it's just, that was the point where it was like, you've got to go, because you can't recover from this because you don't understand what's going on. You haven't squared it in your own head. The difference in squad between this season and last season, you haven't actually connected all the dots. So you're so out of tune of what's going on, you can't turn this around because you're not thinking about it in a clear way. And it'll be that post-match interview where it's like, that's just a man who just didn't really understand where he was and what he was doing. Yeah,
I'm very conflicted. I respect him in one way because he had the tendency to step down from a job that he had become abundantly clear he wasn't capable of doing, and also furious at the way that he did it, which was effectively to say, I haven't got the tools to do this job, so that he could preserve his reputation. So in one way, he didn't cost the club more money to sack him, but I don't think there was any altruism in what he did. He walked so that he could get the job at Blackburn when he eventually did, without his reputation being tarnished with a sacking. I don't think he was thinking about the finances of the club. Whereas actually, this season's relegation, I think, can be put down to two people, and I know that everyone's going to say, yeah, you're right, it's Sisu and Sisu, but it's him and Slade. They were the architects of this miserable downfall. Yeah, so then Venus. Let's have very brief words on Venus and all the rest of the managers. I know that Slade is going to be very difficult to not do, but Neil, Venus.
Yeah, he just felt like Mowbray Mark II, if you ask me. He wasted our time. He wasn't there for the long haul, and we needed a change immediately, and he wasn't a change that we needed. And it was just, I just wish we'd got someone in at that point rather than stick with someone who was still in the same mindset as the previous manager.
Paul?
I'm going to give you 3 words, and I'm going to give you a very short paragraph why. Wright, Agai, and Sordell. Just because it worked at Port Vale away doesn't mean it's going to work every time you play it subsequently.
Yeah, I think nice brevity there. I would say Venus, neither my fire nor my desire.
Lovely.
Then
Well
Slade. Neil?
Even more waste of my time, but for a longer period. Just God's sake, man. It just allowed 3 months of continuous losses and the decisions to sack off the good players and bring in people like Nathan Clark who are bad. God almighty. That's it.
Paul?
Woeful transfers. Woeful performances. Under him, we lost to Chesterfield, he got relegated. We lost to Swansea at home, he got relegated. We lost to Oldham. We lost to Bury. You know, all those games against the big 6-pointers, which I think it's like, what do you call them? Fucking Oldham. Finished like 15 points ahead of us. They were like 1 point ahead of us or on the same points when he got the job. And as I said, I was decided earlier, that interview where it's like, I don't have the tools. And it's like, no, you are a tool. That's the problem. You're a fucking clueless idiot who kept, when you play 3-5-2 and then put Jordan Turnbull on the left wing back and stuff, you're like, you haven't got an idea of what you're trying to achieve. And when Dion Kelly-Evans had a great game in the semi-final and was on drop the next day, and you just like, every time we sort of built up any momentum under him, you managed to kill it by just changing the wrong players and just playing fucking Carmway Thomas on the left wing, using Marcus Tugguy as a number 10. Just everything he did when he just smacked to a guy who didn't have a clue. And this was a guy who's managed 600 league games. It's just criminal.
I do love how when he came in, Slade, and we were something like 13 points off playoffs, which is still a huge amount. And then the point he left, we were 18 points off safety. That is such a bad job. How could anybody get it so wrong in 3 months?
Just, I think, I said the thing that always got me was every time he picked a formation, you were like, oh, okay. He then couldn't put the players in the best players in the formation. So it was like, it didn't, because in that interview, so I tried all the formations. It's like, you haven't tried the right player in the right formation yet, have you? You've just tried. And, I mean, you read that and you read what he said when he went to Grimsby, and a bit like Mowbray, you just get the feeling he couldn't see it for whatever reason. He couldn't see what the fans could see. And that's what surprises me the most is Mark Robins, I don't think has done anything revolutionary. He just picked the players in their right position. And it sort of worked to an extent. You still got the problem that not all the players are that good, but just ostracising people like Biggie Marley is just
That's it, isn't it? It's the players who it means something to, and you can tell it. I mean, that's what Slade did. He came and he brought in all these people who had literally no connection to the club in any sense. They just came in at that point because they needed a club, and he threw them all in. He got rid of the players who probably, although they were playing poorly, just we needed them in the team, because at that point in time we needed some people who actually cared.
For me, with Slade, we've talked before we started about maybe doing the odd podcast over the summer that is kind of generic and positive. There's part of me that thinks that there's an entire podcast that could be done about the anger towards his tenure that's not positive at all, because we haven't got the time now to talk fully about the abysmal nature of his reign, but it is absolutely without mitigation or qualification. And that when he left, to say along the lines of, I wasn't fully aware of what was going on Sisu wise and everything, is an absolutely massive abdication of responsibility. That working under those owners, we all accept, is incredibly difficult. But you're not telling me that financial wise, or for a club of our size, that it's absolutely 100% prohibitive. It's bullshit. He made awful decisions on and off the pitch, and that he needs to, at some point, people need to take personal responsibility and just go, do you know what? Actually, I wasn't ready for this job and I fucked it up. But the fact that when he left, he didn't just go, I actually think I owe you an apology. Oh, fuck you.
Well, I think it's like, you think of some of the other managers we've had under CC, some people like Presley were under transfer embargoes, and all the other shit that's gone on. And you look at Russell Slade, and it's like, the only person who hasn't played Biggie and is playing Kevin Foley ahead of him is you.
Didn't play Stephenson most of the time.
Yeah, you're like, you're the player who's playing. You're the person who's playing players out of position. You had a transfer window. You're in the bottom four of League One. We all know that you've got those limitations, but you've then sold your top goal scorer and bought in someone we know doesn't score goals. Now, that was your choice. As you said earlier, we've all read Matty Roper's interview with Marvin Sordell, who didn't look like he particularly pushed for that move. So, and to be fair to Marvin Sordell, he's been part of a Burton team who have stayed up in the Championship.
And he's got the odd goal for him as well, Marvin Sordell. Yeah. God bless him. I like Marvin Sordell. I feel like I was really harsh to him when we signed him, and I'm really glad that I get to go, I'm sorry, I think you might actually be an alright player. I think he's amazing, but he seems like a decent fella and a decent player, doesn't he? Neil, 3 words on Robbins.
It will be okay.
Paul?
Still shit away.
I would go for give it games. Yeah. I think, in a weird way, as ineloquent as all of that is, that probably does some... If you conflated those 9 words, that probably gives you an idea of where we're at. Let's talk about Wembley, because we want to finish on a high note, and it was just a magnificently high point. No matter how cynical you want to be about it, and the nature of why we were at Wembley, it was just beautiful, wasn't it, Neil? Yeah,
I'm so glad I was able to enjoy it for what it was on the day, and I think there was a lot of worry beforehand about, I didn't know what to expect, and all the talk of protest and just quite what the feeling would be on the day. But actually, I am just so glad we had that day and we were able to just enjoy it as a club and actually win. So it turns out winning that game was important, and to get that as well. Yeah, I'm just tremendously pleased that we've now got that in our trophy cabinet. That's lovely Checker Trade trophy.
It's so funny because I feel exactly the same. I just didn't think it was... Maybe this is, history written by the victors. I just didn't think I was going to care about it until it was the point where I thought we might not. And then we did. And it was beautiful. Just seeing everyone. It's a weird kind of... it's a weird point in sort of your own history as well, because you see, weirdly, as I was walking back out of Wembley, I happened to bump into all of the different sort of carved people. Me and you bumped into each other, which I was absolutely delighted about, given that
I accosted you. I jumped on you, and we had a good old chat, and that was good.
It was
I planned all day to see you, and it just, because of so many people being
it's just
there,
impossible, isn't it?
Yeah.
But the walk back was a really lovely moment for me, because I was trying to find... I'd got sort of... Because I'm so popular... No, because there was 3 or 4 different factions of people that I was trying to, work out how to meet. I walked around like a fucking idiot for ages trying to find people. But then while I was doing it, I just bumped into everybody that I was just like, oh, yes, yeah. Paul, your Wembley reminiscences, I think, perhaps more familial.
Yeah. Yeah. The girls are still absolutely ecstatic about it, which is
Brilliant.
Still nice. I had my parents up at the weekend, and my mum wears way too much Coventry City paraphernalia, and Kate just points and goes, Coventry. So she's just... And you hear about this story, my 4-year-old's supporting Liverpool because, I don't know, he's just like, I don't understand how, really bizarre how sort of, kids always seem to start supporting the really big clubs when they're about 4. But it's nice that, like, obviously they have no concept of the fact we got relegated. I haven't told them that we're completely shit. If Mary read between the lines, she'd understand that we were completely shit. But they're still happy the fact that they support a team and they saw them win, and they saw them win a trophy. And, I'm hoping there are other kids out there who had the same experience that my 2 had. It puts everything in perspective. I sort of know what Joey's saying earlier. It's difficult, isn't it? I wouldn't trade it for sort of whether or not... I don't know if I'd trade it for staying up. Probably not, because we won, and just being in that environment. I mean, it was also the semi-final as much as the final was just... It was finally a nice memory of the Rico. It was a good evening, and it was a special evening, and we have had so few of those at the Rico that it was nice to be there for that as well, and have that experience of actually having a positive moment at the Rico compared to, the 2 relegations we've suffered since we've been at the Rico have both been at the Rico. In a strange way. So it was nice to have a positive memory of the Rico before we move on to our own ground. But it's difficult, isn't it? Because it was a month ago. It was so great. I'm glad that we weren't relegated before we went. I'm glad that Russell Slade wasn't in charge, because that would have pissed me off a little bit. I'm just thinking about back to the game itself. Sort of the clearance off the line by Biggie having the game he had, George Thomas scoring that goal, being another academy kid, even just like the performance of Chris Stokes, who came in, played centre half, and was magnificent on the day. So the players all rose to the occasion, which is what you want. It was just a great day out. Unfortunately, finishing on a positive, it has to go in that box of it was a great day out, but it's almost a bit like having a girlfriend where you sort of, I remember the great times, but ultimately we sort of split up because she was a bit of a mad cow. A bit like that. It's like, it was great, but when I look back at the season, it's only one small part of it. The rest of the story is we got relegated. We were truly awful. I'll remember the game against Chesterfield and places, things like that. Not as much as I remember Wembley, but they were always part of the whole Russell Slade. I said, no one went on a negative, but I have to put it in that box of it was great, but in a weird way, it was a bit of a strange cup run because we didn't care about the early rounds. You didn't get that build-up of excitement. It's all a bit weird. So I've really enjoyed the day at Wembley, but it will always be tampered by the fact that it was in a season of utter shit.
But at least without it, I don't know if I'll be going this year. But with it, without being too dramatic, I think that was enough to push me back into loving the club again. It was that small moment. I still do care enough about it, and that's why I'll probably go in this season, League Two or not. It's enough. It was enough for me to realise just how much it still all mattered to me.
Oh, that's great.
I think that's massive.
I said the girls absolutely loved it, and from that point of view, I wouldn't change it, and I don't think I would stop it for staying up. But it still feels like a bit of a last hurrah for a club that's just going nowhere. And that's unfortunately how I know you're getting a season ticket. I probably will end up getting one. I just would like, I would just like things to change because, as I said, my worry is we're building another completely new squad where we'll walk in the first game of the season. It's like, who the fuck are all these guys? It's just getting harder and harder, and
we won't be the only team to do that.
No, Neil, I know that completely. I know that that's just the way of the world at the moment, but it's getting harder to restart every season, not knowing who the players are, and also over the course of the season, not really getting that emotionally attached to anyone because you know they're going to be there. It's just part of it for me has always been about you sort of like players, so you sort of, as I said earlier, I don't care about any of the loan players you've had. I won't follow their careers. I followed sort of Gary Caldwell, sort of Warnock. Still look to see how Armstrong and Murphy are getting on. Players who impacted on me from what I saw. It's getting harder when the players I just don't give a shit about. And that's one of my reasons why I've really hated Lewis Page, because I just saw him as a pointless signing, and he kept Ryan Haynes out the side, and it was just like this is killing it a little bit for me. Just we're getting nothing players, and as you said earlier, it's like you look at Russell Slade signings. He basically brought in players who are going to be here for like 4 or 5 months at the end of the season. Most of them, I'm sure if you ask them, like, yeah, I'm a bit sad that Coventry got relegated. But it didn't mean anything because they knew they weren't going to be here next season. The consequences they weren't going to live with the consequences. And that's what it feels like from the whole club, from top to bottom, is, you know, what happens to Coventry happens. Most people don't suffer the consequences.
Okay, I think that as a point is where we're going to wrap up the entire season's review. So if you want to get in touch with us over the summer, it's niilampteyshow@gmail.com, or it's @niilampteyshow on Twitter. It's also niilampteyshow.com is the website that we've got now that Neil has massively revamped and looks bloody sexy. If you want to get in touch with us with the ideas of what you'd like us to do, we're sort of toying with doing something over the summer, maybe that's a little bit positive, or that we might knock out the odd occasional podcast of something nice. If that's something you'd like to hear, give us your ideas and let us know what you think. But otherwise, we will, with a heavy heart, see you in League Two, and we'll be back next season. We'll be back with Sideways Sammy doing previews next season, which is very exciting. It means that we don't have to pretend that we know what is going on. We can just give him his voice rather than stealing it. And we will still be supporting Coventry City, you know, hell or high water. Thank you, Paul.
Cheers, mate.
Thank you, Neil.
Cheers, both.
And for the final time this season, thank you, listener. Bye.